Hello, welcome to Tate Modern, where today Joshua and myself will be looking at a major retrospective by Pablo Picasso. With 100 pieces of work produced in the year 1932, we'll be selecting a few of those pieces to see if we can cast new light on his ways of working and thinking. We're standing in front of a painting called Nude, Green Leaves and Bust from 1932, and it is Marie-Therèse. It's an extraordinarily rich, intricate and quite disturbing painting actually. You have the model down at the bottom of the picture plane, sort of bisected by these two black marks, these two ribbons in a way. On top of her there is a bust of her, so we have a kind of double image of the model, and this very strange sort of theatrical rigged up room with the curtains strung up at the back and these beautiful blues changing as we go across the picture plane. So it's an extraordinarily intense piece of painting.
This painting, of all the works in the show, I think really illustrates this extraordinary sort of passion that Picasso has for this young woman, of the sort of frustrations he feels because of course it's illicit, he's still married, but nevertheless he is a middle-aged man who is besotted, madly in love and full of desire for this young woman. He doesn't model her from life, but carries this very strong sort of idea of her presence, of her voluptuous, sensual body. And it's full of sort of conundrums, principally this sort of relationship between the bust, which shows Marie-Thérèse in profile with this very distinctive forehead and nose, and the reclining figure. It's almost like there are two sides to Marie-Thérèse being presented in the painting. And of course, the staging of it is so critical. And I'm drawn to these sort of details here. Is this an ear? Is it an eye? Is it a form of genitalia that Picasso is exploring in this whole body of work in 1932. You know, this sort of erotic presence of the body. So it's a wonderful picture. I really love it, and particularly these leaves here that dance and oscillate in space. This painting is titled Girl Before a Mirror. And again, it's a very important and significant work in the exhibition. We see a woman on the left who is less physically close to Marie-Thérèse than the first picture. But we have that idea, that archetype of woman on the left side of the painting. And she's looking at this mirror in an oval frame on the right. So you get this duality. The painting is divided down the center, isn't it? And you would expect to see a direct reflection of her face, of her physical features, but it's very sort of murky, isn't it? It's very sort of Freudian, I think, this painting. And I'm drawn to this sort of area here. This looks very kind of masculine. Rather than a sort of feminine doubling of her body. So it becomes, I think, a kind of representation of man and woman, as if it's an expression of his relationship with Marie-Thérèse.
It's a complicated painting, isn't it? It refers to a Manet painting, and it of course refers to a whole tradition of vanitas paintings, the idea of youth passing, the idea of vanity, of women looking into mirrors. There's a whole European tradition of that. And like you, I'm drawn to the face. On one side, it's very plain and youthful. On the other side, it seems very kind of highly made up, lots of kind of paint on the face in a way. So is it about a face you present to the world and a private face? Is it about innocence and knowledge, youth and aging? I think there are lots of interpretations, lots of readings. But it is an incredibly, again, intense painting. Not only does Picasso take pleasure in those curves, in that body, that young woman that he loves and lusts after her, he takes pleasure in the surface of the painting. There is pattern and colour and these sort of disparate colours, this mauve and this kind of limey green that appear during the year in these paintings. So it's very, very intense. And I love this, the curve of the spine, almost a rib cage or vertebrae there, and then this arm that stretches all the way across the painting. So very complex piece of composition. Here we have a painting called Rest from 1932. Possibly it's about Picasso's unsuccessful or failing relationship with his wife Olga. All the time that he has a relationship with Marie-Therèse, he's still married to Olga, they have a young child. The beginning of this relationship with Marie-Therèse is in secret, and it's a very difficult time for Picasso and for his family. This year, 1932, he's hit 50, and I think he's trying to keep his work relevant, to keep it contemporary, to keep on pushing. And this painting is aggressive for me, actually. I find it a very disturbing painting. He has pushed the female body just about as far as you can push it and still make it recognisable. This very, very fierce face with the sort of misplaced features and the spike-like hair coming off the back of the skull. And all of this placed in a very sort of conventional, boring, sort of ochre, umber interior.
This is the female body as an insect. And it's disturbing. He elongates the body until she becomes sort of multi-armed, multi-limbed. And I'm drawn to the mouth and the exposure of the teeth, a sort of recurring trope of the surrealists. That idea of woman as an object of desire, but also of fear. And there are intriguing sort of details whereby he does this sort of doubling, which again is very sort of influenced by the surrealists, whereby the hair on the back of the head also becomes like eyelashes on an eye here, where the breast doubles as an iris. So they are full of games inside the painting. But I think fundamentally, this is an illustration of deep ambivalence towards the object of desire, the sort of potential partner or mate. And, you know, it's very different from his representations of Marie-Thérèse in the exhibition.
This painting, Three Dancers, is, I think, justifiably well known. It's made in 1925, and it is these three figures locked into this erotic, macabre dance in this incredibly claustrophobic space. They are attached to each other. There's a central figure. They're inside a domestic space with sort of doors opening onto the sea, onto the sky, incredibly patterned surface. And what's interesting from a kind of making perspective is that this painting was painted over an existing painting. So you get this fantastic scumbling, this really rich, thick paint on the left-hand side. Picasso is so confident that he included a previous piece of work in this piece. And I think this central figure always kind of stays with me, this crucifix form. However radical Picasso is, and he is truly radical, he's always tapping into a tradition, something that we will recognise.
Well, it's so dynamic, this painting, isn't it? We have these three figures, their hands connected in a circle. It's a sort of dance of life, or is it a dance of death? And it's full of rich detail. We have this wild head on the left that also carries a profile of a moon-like face on the side, connected together to make one whole head. And of course this becomes a very prominent feature of the work of 1932 in his depiction of Marie-Thérèse. But this picture is presented within a room that recreates his retrospective of 1932, where Picasso selects works from the whole of his career. And he always regarded this as an important example from his lifetime and kept it in his studio. But essentially, what are we looking at? I think it speaks of a kind of release, primal expression of instinct and drive. Their nudity is so important, isn't it? The stripping off of restraint, of that civilized veneer. Within a Parisian bourgeois apartment, we have these fleur-de-lis motifs on the wallpaper. This is really, you know, the heart of sort of French civilization, but almost like emerging from the floor are these wild, gyrating figures. This ink drawing is part of a series that Picasso makes in September at Bois-Geloup, his Normandy house. And they are fascinating. I think these are some of the highlights of the show. They're really stunning and intriguing And he's inspired by the Isenheim altarpiece by Matthias Grunwald, a medieval painter. And the altarpiece resides in Colmar in Alsace. And what we have here is Picasso's deconstruction of the traditional scene of the crucifixion of Jesus on the cross and his followers and disciples. And what we're looking at here are a set of forms, really sort of elemental forms that resemble bones, this sort of anatomy of the body that he arranges across this backdrop. And we have to kind of imaginatively try and sort of reassemble them together to make sense of the narrative.
I think I totally agree with you. I think it's absolutely beautiful and fascinating. And fascinating in that Picasso can go from amazingly erotic paintings of his young lover to religious altarpieces within the same year. He can flip between these two subjects. They are incredible bits of draftsmanship. And you're right, he takes all the pieces apart in a really cubist way. But they look very surreal. They look very surrealist. These, although he never belonged to any group or wanted to be closely associated with Breton's group, they definitely have a surrealist feel about them. And they're very beautiful and they're very disturbing. You have to figure them out. But I think it just goes back to Picasso pushing, even these hugely respected subjects that he approaches. And he approaches very traditional subjects, really, still lifes, nudes, religious pieces. He feels he can push them just about as far as you can go. So I think this is a fascinating glimpse into Picasso. Picasso is somebody we think we know so well. There have been numerous exhibitions. I think to look at one year, 1932, this pivotal year, this amazingly creative year, is very useful. I do think also it is fascinating to see this exhibition at this time politically. We're very much thinking about women's rights again, our place in the workplace, our place in the world. And to look at Picasso and his amazing innovation in painting and his frankly appalling attitude to the women in his life is quite difficult and it's quite interesting. And I think it's a good time to be looking at Picasso.
Well, this frame of 1932 is arguably a very narrow focus, but obviously it was a hugely productive year for him and a year of turmoil emotionally, and that comes through the art. But I think fundamentally what we're looking at and learning about is this infatuation between a man who is an artist and the privilege he has of looking at this younger woman who inspires him, who acts as his muse. And so in a benign spirit, it's ultimately an exhibition about love. But I hear what you're saying, and it is problematic because historically most artists have been men, and their subject has usually been that of a woman, a naked woman, a passive woman. So inevitably the cultural sort of context and our understanding has changed, but ultimately we're left with these extraordinary works of art that remain beguiling and fascinating and very rewarding too. Thank you for watching this film about Picasso 1932 at Tate Modern on the Art Channel. Please give the film a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to the channel and follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram and on Facebook.